Hey, and welcome back to Technology Now, a weekly show from Hewlett Packard Enterprise where we take what's happening in the world and explore how it's changing the way organizations are using technology. We're your hosts, Aubrey Lovell
and Michael Bird. Hey, indeed. Now, in this episode, we are looking at private networks, in particular, private cellular networks, which allow events and organizations access to their own dedicated feeds separate from consumer networks. So if you want reliable connectivity over wide distances, a private network is the way to do it. It's an exciting technology which is already revolutionizing everything from sports broadcasting to IoT over huge areas like power plants, wind farms, and agriculture.
So why are we talking about private networking now? And what does it mean for enterprises and for us as users? Well, if you're the kind of person who needs to know why what's going on in the world matters to your organization, this podcast is for you. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to your podcast app of choice so you don't miss out. All right, Michael, let's get into it.
Let's do it.
Private networking isn't a new phenomenon. However, until recently, it was technologically distinct from commercial cellular networks. With the advent of 4G in 2009, it became apparent that the consumer technology was now a prime candidate for private networks as well as public and commercial provision, and spectrum slowly began to be offered to private users. 4G was limited in what it could do, though. It offered speed, but wasn't optimized for low latency, IoT, or security. That changed with the advent of 5G, which factored in all of those other needs. Additionally, an increasing number of countries have released specific so-called MPN spectrum to private users. The result has been an explosion in the technology.
In 2023, the 5G private network market was worth around $2 billion. That's expected to grow to over $30 billion by 2030, and that is according to Grand View Research. This is despite 5G being unlikely to overtake 4G as the dominant private networking technology until 2027, according to Kaleido Intelligence. And we've linked to those studies, as always, in the show notes. So, why is private 5G networking such a growth area, and what could it mean for our organizations? Well, recently I met with Richard Band, HPE's Senior Sales Director for Private Networking in Europe, Middle East, Africa, and Latin America to discuss. Richard, welcome to the show. What exactly is private networking? Isn't it just Wi-Fi?
It's kind of like Wi-Fi, but slightly different.
Okay.
So, private networking, when we say private networking, what we really mean is private cellular networking. So basically, the 4G or 5G network you get from your operator, but then deployed, dedicated to you as an enterprise, on which you have full control, and you can make certain it does exactly what you need it to do.
Amazing. And what's changed in the world of private networking in the last few years? I mean, are there influences from 4G, 5G, 6G?
So there's quite a few things going on around private networking. So private networking has been around for quite some time. There have been cellular technologies that were not aligned with what we use as consumers. What's changing now is we're adopting the same technologies. And what's also changing is that more and more countries are opening up spectrum. Instead of letting all the spectrum to the operators, enterprise can apply directly for spectrum for their private use. And that's a big development in this market.
So is private networking only for very large organizations?
At this stage, it tends to be more for the large organizations simply because it's an emerging technology. And the initial use cases in which it's been applied tended to be very large area coverage.
Right.
Things like oil rigs, mines, large manufacturing plants. Now we're starting to see it evolve towards warehousing, hospitals, large public events, hospitality. So you're seeing a democratization of the technology.
Why a private network versus a big Wi-Fi network? Or is it a sort of combination of the both?
So the two technologies are complementary.
Sure.
Wi-Fi tends to be really good when you have dense coverage on a relatively small area, an area measured in square meters or square feet if you're American. While private networking, the first use case has been around wider area coverage.
Right.
Square kilometers, square miles. Second, where private networking or private cellular is different from Wi-Fi is that it supports mobility quite well. So as people are deploying things like automated guided vehicles, this is where you get a need for additional technologies because Wi-Fi can't keep up with those kind of use cases. So there's a couple of different reasons why people have looked at private cellular. I would say as a complement rather than a substitute for Wi-Fi.
And why wouldn't you just use the cellular networks that are already there? Or are we talking about locations where there is no cellular coverage?
In some instances, it's a matter of location. So if you're an oil rig on the North Sea, then obviously there is no public cellular network. But there's also the fact that a public cellular network is a best effort and has blind spots and can be a lot of work to get those covered by your public network provider. There's the fact that in a public network, all the data goes back to the central location, whereas in a private network, it stays on site.
Right.
And so if it's large amounts of data, for instance, for analytics, or if it's very sensitive data like patient records, you may not want this to go out of your premises.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of reasons why public may not be able to meet your needs.
Presumably there's a speed factor there as well. And if you're sending data on a public network back to a data center, maybe doing multiple hops to get back to a place where you can use that information. Whereas I suppose if you have your own private network, you can just send it straight back to your data center and you can process it
so
there.
for instance, if it's used to remotely control a robot with low latency, high precision,
Sure.
then yes, that's definitely a factor. The turnaround time is quicker. But mostly the logic is that if the data is collected locally, analyzed locally, and applied locally, then why would you bother sending it all back to a central location?
Yeah, no, totally get that. So you've touched on a few, but can you just talk through maybe some of the more extreme or interesting use cases for private networking, perhaps over the last couple of years?
Certainly. We did one that was very fun. We deployed a private network in Antarctica.
Oh, wow.
So there's a research base that gets occupied, from November to Feb or something like that. So for a period of 4 or 5 months during the Antarctic summer, we deployed a private networking to cover the full research base. And then we used a satellite uplink to connect that back to the rest of the world so they could upload the data that was relevant. But they also had everything they needed locally to be connected. So
Wow.
it was kind of a fun project.
So is the world of private networking experiencing a landscape shift at all, particularly with the rise of things like Edge AI and Edge AR and XR, I guess the increase in speed and all the other things that come with 5G and 6G?
So what we're seeing is that, yes, obviously these kind of technologies are driving an increased demand or generation of data, analytics of data, and then acting upon that data, which in turn drives the demand for private cellular networks. There are other factors at play, but this is part of the equation, definitely. I think the reality is that what is really driving the adoption at the moment is the evolution, not so much of the technology, but the environment around it.
Right.
So I mentioned before the fact that more and more countries are opening up spectrum directly for enterprise.
Yeah.
So that obviously lowers the barrier to adoption. There's the ecosystem element. So if you want to go, say, the healthcare sector, there's a lot of devices that have embedded connectivity that need to become ready for use of private cellular rather than alternative technologies. So that's what's driving, I would say, on the technology front. And then on the actual usage, there's just a whole host of things that are indeed ultimately linked to AI and AR, which is just the fact that people are deploying more and more devices at the edge that are collecting data that need to be analyzed and that need to be acted upon. And as that increased usage is happening, we do see that translates into an increased demand for connectivity, which sometimes needs to be met with private cellular.
Thanks, Michael and Richard. And obviously, there's some amazing insights in there. And we'll be right back with more from that in a moment. So don't go anywhere.
Right, well, now it is time for Today I Learned, the part of the show where we take a look at something happening in the world that we think you should know about. Aubrey, I think it's one from you this week.
It is. Thanks, Michael. And it's an interplanetary one for me again today.
Ooh.
I love a good space story.
You get all the space stories, don't you?
I do. I really do. Producer Sam loves to give me the space stories. And you know what? I'll take it. No worries. So, new research has suggested we may have been looking at the moons of our solar system's coldest planet all wrong. Almost everything we know about Uranus' 5 major satellites comes from a flyby of the Voyager 2 spacecraft in 1986. Voyager's instruments measured the magnetic field of the planet, which appeared to be oddly distorted in a way which suggested that the planet's moons were completely geologically dead, making them extremely unusual among the solar system's major moons. That's interesting. However, new research published in the journal Nature Astronomy suggests that actually the solar system's coldest planet was just having a really, really bad day when Voyager 2 zipped by. It was in the process of being hit by a massive solar storm, which artificially dented the planet's magnetosphere. sounds hurtful. That, in turn, made the moons look dead. In fact, new measurements suggest the moons may well have geological activity caused by Uranus's gravity and even subsurface oceans. And where there's heat and water, you might just find life.
Ooh. Well, thank you, Aubrey. That is really exciting. Always amazing how much we still don't know about our own celestial backyard.
All right. Well, now it's time to return to your interview with Richard Band to talk private networking.
Looking into 2025, 2026 and beyond, what kinds of challenges or opportunities are you looking to tackle, or do you think our customers are looking to be tackling? And how is that changing over what's happening maybe today?
The state of the market for private cellular at the moment is that it is really something that is being adopted industry by industry,
Sure.
as they are doing the things that I mentioned before, like automated guided vehicles, video analytics, these kind of things. So what we've seen is that there are certain industries like the mining, the ports, the offshore, where this is really mainstream now. People don't need to be convinced anymore. And then there are other industries like hospitality, large public venues, healthcare, logistics, where people are starting to adopt technologies like robots in warehouses that increase the amount of data, that increase the speed of operation. And at that point, they come to us and say, we need this technology.
Yeah. Do you get customers coming to you where they sort of reach the limits of what Wi-Fi can do and they're like, okay, I think we need something different? Is that when people are coming to approach you?
Absolutely. So what we see is as people do more with technology and as they are doing more automation, more analytics, they are getting into places where previously there was no need for connectivity, or the type of connectivity is changing. So Wi-Fi, for instance, works really well at walking speed. If you go beyond, say, 20 kilometers per hour, cellular network has been designed for mobility and is giving a more reliable connection. An automated guided vehicle, when it loses connectivity, it has to stop by regulation.
Yeah.
So at that point, once you deploy automated guided vehicle, the reliability of that network at speed becomes so much more important.
Sure,
and
yeah.
that drives the adoption of new technologies.
Wow. Yeah, okay. Are there any technologies that are now maturing and are going to be maturing into 2025 that you're excited to see fully rolled out or commercialized? And what will that technology mean for our customers?
It's not one big thing.
Sure.
What I'm really excited about is seeing more and more industry players adopting the technology into their products. Again, in this environment, there's a lot of OT, operational technology, that has embedded connectivity. And so if you want the market to take off, you need the companies manufacturing those products to start adopting technology. We've been working with healthcare providers for, suppliers of healthcare equipment 2 or 3 years ago so that they could test it in their labs. And now we're starting to see that come to the actual healthcare industry itself.
Right.
So that's what's exciting, is to just see the slow adoption of this technology spreading out across industries.
So Richard, one final question from me. Why should organizations care about private networking?
So organizations should not care about private networking per se. They should care about their business goals in terms of automation, in terms of analytics. And then, when they are clear on that, they become clear on the connectivity needs, then we should have a conversation about whether private cellular is the right technology. And again, there are certain well-specified areas, coverage, speed, segmentation of traffic between the wider public and your own in-house, for instance, where very clearly this technology makes sense. And we'd be happy to have the conversation at that point in time.
Amazing. Richard, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Michael. It's been great to hear from Richard, and you can find more on the topics discussed in today's episode in the show notes. All right, well, we're getting towards the end of the show, which means it's time for This Week in History, a look at monumental events in the world of business and technology, which has changed our lives. Okay, Michael, give me something life-changing. I'm ready.
Well, I will give you something life-changing. The clue last week was it's 1895, and this will have quite the impact on science. Did you get it?
No clue.
Well, it was a tricky one, aren't they all? It was the writing of the last will and testament of Alfred Nobel, which saw him deposit most of his fortune into a Swiss bank account to enable the founding of the Nobel Prizes. Now, the categories to be established were for physics, chemistry, physiology, literature, and a prize for peace. Essentially, Nobel, who felt a level of guilt for making his fortune inventing dynamite, wanted to promote science for good in the world. Now, he died a year later, and the first prizes were awarded in 1901. And just as a side note, the Economics Prize was funded by the Swedish National Bank and first awarded in 1969. I have been to the Nobel Prize Museum in Stockholm in Sweden. And
of course you would.
It's What makes you say that?
You just seem like you would be. Yes, exactly. How was it?
It was good. There was this lovely installation where they had all of the Nobel Prize winners, their photos on these cards that was on like a track swirling around the place. It was really cool. Very, very interesting.
Nice.
And made me feel like I should probably do more with my life. I'm not sure they do a Nobel Prize for podcasting, Aubrey.
Well, maybe we can look into that. Maybe we'll be the first.
Maybe. Right. Well, Aubrey, what is the clue for next week?
Well, the clue for next week is it's 1945 and we're hooked on you.
Ooh.
Huh.
Okay.
I don't know.
Not a clue. As always, not a clue.
Well, that brings us to the end of Technology Now for this week. Thank you to our guest, Richard Band, Senior Sales Director for Private Networks at Hewlett Packard Enterprise. And to you, our listeners, as always, thanks for hanging with us.
Technology Now is hosted by Aubrey Lovell and myself, Michael Bird, and this episode was produced by Sam Datapaulin and Alicia Kempson-Taylor, with production support from Harry Morton, Zoe Anderson, Alison Paisley, and Alyssa Mitchery.
Our social editorial team is Rebecca Wissinger, Judy Ann Goldman, Katie Guarino, and our social media designers are Alejandra Garcia, Carlos Alberto Suarez, and Ambar Maldonado.
Technology Now is a Low Street production for Hewlett Packard Enterprise, and we'll see you at the same time, the same place next week. Cheers.